History of the Jews in Scotland. The history of the Jews in Scotland goes back to at least the 17th century. It is not known when Jews first arrived in Scotland, with the earliest concrete historical references to a Jewish presence in Scotland being from the late 17th century. Most Scottish Jews today are of Ashkenazi background, who mainly settled in Edinburgh, then in Glasgow in the mid-19th century. In 2013, the Edinburgh Jewish Studies Network curated an online exhibition based on archival holdings and maps in the National Library of Scotland exploring the influence of the community on the city. According to the 2011 census, 5,887 Jews lived in Scotland, a decline of 8.7% from the 2001 census. The total population of Scotland at the time was 5,313,600, making Scottish Jews 0.1% of the population. Middle Ages to union with England. There is only scant evidence of a Jewish presence in medieval Scotland. In 1180, the Bishop of Glasgow forbade churchmen to lodge their benefices for money borrowed from Jews. This was around the time of anti-Jewish riots in England, so it is possible that Jews may have arrived in Scotland as refugees, or it may refer to Jews domiciled in England from whom Scots were borrowing money. In the Middle Ages, much of Scotland's trade was with continental Europe, with wool of the Borders Abbey's being the country's main export to Flanders and the Low Countries. Scottish merchants from Aberdeen and Dundee had close trading links to Baltic ports in Poland and Lithuania. It is possible, therefore, that Jews may have come to Scotland to do business with their Scottish counterparts, although no direct evidence of this exists. The late 18th century author Henry Mackenzie speculated that the high incidence of biblical place names around the village of Morningside near Edinburgh might indicate that Jews. This belief has, however, been shown to be incorrect, with the names originating instead from the presence of a local farm named Egypt, mentioned in historical documents from the 16th century and believed to indicate a Romani presence. 17th–19th centuries. The first recorded Jew in Edinburgh was one David Brown, who made a successful application to reside and trade in the city in 1691. Most Jewish immigration appears to have occurred post-industrialization and post-1707, by which time Jews in Scotland were subject to various anti-Jewish laws that applied to Britain as a whole. Oliver Cromwell readmitted Jews to the Commonwealth of England in 1656 and would have had influence over whether they could reside north of the border. Scotland was under the jurisdiction of the Jew Bill enacted in 1753, but repealed the next year. It has been theorized that some Jews who arrived in Scotland promptly assimilated, with some converting to Christianity. The first graduate from the University of Glasgow who was openly known to be Jewish was Levi Myers in 1787. Unlike their English contemporaries, Scottish students were not required to take a religious oath. In 1795, Herman Lyon, a dentist and chiropodist, bought a burial plot in Edinburgh. Originally from Mogendorf, Germany, he left there around 1764 and spent some time in Holland before arriving in London. He moved to Scotland in 1788. The presence of the plot on Calton Hill is no longer obvious today, but it is marked on the Ordnance Survey map of 1852 as Jews' Burial Vault. The first Jewish congregation in Edinburgh was founded in 1816, when the Edinburgh community consisted of 20 families. The first congregation in Glasgow was founded in 1821, and that of Aberdeen was founded in 1893. The Jewish cemetery in Dundee indicates that there has been a Jewish congregation in that city since the 19th century. Much of the first influx of Jews to Scotland were Dutch and German merchants attracted to the commercial economies of Scottish cities. Isaac Cohen, a Hatter resident in Glasgow, was admitted a burgess of the city on 22 September 1812. The first interment on the Glasgow necropolis was that of Joseph Levy, a quill merchant and cholera victim who was buried there on 12 September 1832. This occurred in the year before the formal opening of the burial ground, a part of it having been sold to the Jewish community beforehand for 100 guineas. Glasgow-born Asher 1837–1889 was the first Scottish Jew to enter the medical profession. He was the author of the Jewish Rite of Circumcision 1873. In the 1850s, a wave of Lithuanian Jews were tricked by a sea captain into believing they were escaping Tsarist Russia to go to America, but ended up in Dundee instead, before moving to Edinburgh and Glasgow. The story of his own family's experience was immortalized in Jack Ronder's book and TV series called The Lost Tribe, starring Miriam Margolyes and Bill Patterson. In 1878, Jewish Hannah de Rothschild, 1851–1890, the richest woman in Britain at the time, married Scottish aristocrat Archibald Primrose, 5th Earl of Rosebery, despite strong anti-Semitic sentiments in court and the aristocracy. They had 4 children. Their son, Harry, would become Secretary of State for Scotland in 1945 during Winston Churchill's post-war caretaker government. To avoid persecution and pogroms in the Russian Empire in the 1880s, many Jews settled in the larger cities of Britain, including Scotland, most notably in Glasgow, especially the poorer part of the city, the Gorbals, alongside Irish and Italian immigrants. A smaller community existed in Edinburgh, and even smaller groups in Dundee, Aberdeen, Greenock, and Ayr. Russian Jews tended to come from the west of the empire, in particular Lithuania and Poland, hoping to use Scotland as a stopping post en route to North America. This explains why Glasgow was their favored location. However, those who were not able to earn enough to afford the transatlantic voyage ended up settling in the city. In 1897, after the influx, the Jewish population of Glasgow was 4,000. This second influx of Jews was notably larger than the first, and came from Eastern Europe as opposed to Western European countries like Germany and the Netherlands. This led to the informal distinction between the West Juden, who tended to be middle class and assimilated into Scottish society, and the much bigger Ostjuden community, consisting of poor Yiddish speakers who fled pogroms in Eastern Europe. While the West Juden had settled in more affluent areas, such as Garnet Hill in Glasgow, where a synagogue was built in 1879, the Ostjuden settled in slums in the Gorbals, and by 1901 the Jewish population had increased to 10,000. 20th and 21st centuries. Immigration continued into the 20th century, with over 9,000 Jews in 1901 and around 12,000 in 1911. Jewish life in the Gorbals in Glasgow initially mirrored that of traditional shtetl life. However, concerns around this being a contributing factor to a rise in anti-Semitism led to the established Jewish community establishing various philanthropic and welfare organizations with the goals of offering assistance to the Ruhr. The passing of the Aliens Act 1905 led to a substantial decrease in the number of Jewish refugees arriving in Scotland. Refugees from Nazi Germany and the Second World War further augmented the Scottish Jewish community, which has been estimated to have reached over 20,000 in the mid-20th century. By way of comparison, the Jewish population in the United Kingdom peaked at 500,000, but declined to just over half that number by 2008. The practicing Jewish population continues to fall in Scotland, as many younger Jews either became secular or intermarried with other faiths. Scottish Jews have also emigrated in large numbers to England, the United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand for economic reasons, as other Scots have done. According to the 2001 census, 6,448 Jews lived in Scotland. According to the 2011 census, 5,887 Jews lived in Scotland, a decline of 8.7% from 2001. Most live in Glasgow, 4,249, with smaller populations in Edinburgh, about 934, and Dundee. Scotland's Jewish population continues to be predominantly urban. Approximately 41% of Scotland's Jewish population resides in the East Renfrewshire area, with approximately 25% in the suburban town of Newton Mearns, with their families having moved steadily southwards from central Glasgow to more prosperous outer parts of the city over the generations. In March 2008, a Jewish tartan was designed by Brian Wilton for Chabad Rabbi Mendel Jacobs of Glasgow and certified by the Scottish Tartans Authority. The tartan's colors are blue, white, silver, red, and gold. According to Jacobs, the blue and white represent the colors of the Scottish and Israeli flags, with the central gold line representing the gold from the biblical tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, and the many ceremonial vessels. The silver is from the decorations that adorn the scroll of law, and the red represents the traditional red Kiddush wine. Jewish communities in Scotland are historic antisemitism. In the Middle Ages, while Jews in England faced state persecution, culminating in the Edict of Expulsion of 1290, some Jews may have moved to Scotland at this time. There was never a corresponding expulsion from Scotland, suggesting either greater religious tolerance or the simple fact that there was no Jewish presence. In his autobiographical Two Worlds, An Edinburgh Jewish Childhood, the eminent Scottish Jewish scholar David Daitches wrote that there are grounds for asserting that Scotland is the only European country with no history of state persecution of Jews. Modern antisemitism. Scots-Yiddish. Scots-Yiddish is the name given to a Jewish hybrid vernacular between Lowland Scots and Yiddish, which had a brief currency in the lowlands in the first half of the 20th century. The Scottish literary historian David Daitches describes it in his autobiographical account of his Edinburgh Jewish childhood, Two Worlds. Daitches explores the social stratification of Edinburgh's Jewish society in the interwar period, noting what is effectively a class divide between two parts of the community, on the one hand a highly educated and well-integrated group who sought a synthesis of orthodox rabbinical and modern secular thinking. On the other, a Yiddish-speaking group most comfortable maintaining. The Yiddish-speaking population grew up in Scotland in the 19th century, but by the late 20th century had mostly switched to using English. The creolization of Yiddish with Scots was therefore a phenomenon of the middle part of this period. The Glaswegian Jewish poet S.C. Jacobs also refers to his language as Scots-Yiddish. There was even a case of a Jewish immigrant who settled in the Highlands, who spoke no English and was only able to speak Gaelic and Yiddish, 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 and list of Scottish Jews. Ronnie Ancona, comedian. Jenny Calder, writer. Hazel, Lady Cosgrove, first female Court of Session judge. Ivor Cutler, musician, teacher, and comedian. Noam Dar, professional wrestler. Sir Monty Finiston, industrialists, industrialists, Isla Fisher, ethnically Scottish, but converted to Judaism as an adult. Hannah Frank, artist and sculptor. Meyer Lord Galpern, MP, Lord Provost of Glasgow. Ralph Glasser, psychologist and economist, born in Leeds but grew up in Glasgow. Professor Sir Abraham Goldberg, KBMD, DSc, FRCP, FRC, leading medical academic. Muriel Gray, author and presenter of The Tube. Jeremy Isaacs, broadcaster. A C. Jacobs, poet. Mark Knopfler, Dire Straits co-founder, lead vocalist and lead guitarist. Kevin MacDonald, director, known for Touching the Void, The Void. Sol Metstein, filmmaker. Neil Primrose, MP and soldier, Jewish mother. Malcolm Refined, politician. Hugo Refined, broadcaster. Harry Primrose, 6th Earl of Rosebery, Secretary of State for Scotland, Jewish mother. Jerry Sadowitz, controversial comedian and conjurer. Venno Scots, sculptor, sculptor. Sarah Sheridan, writer. Manny Shinwell, politician. J. David Simons, novelist. Dame Muriel Spark, novelists. Harry Lord Wolfe, judge, brought up and educated in Scotland. Notes and references